All right, everyone. Hey, we are back from our short little break there, and we are honored to have an amazing speaker and a huge advocate of podcasts out there who's been doing for quite a while. We will let her come back and talk about when she started and going from there, but you're going to love this content that she's got for you. But before we dive into letting her take over the mic, take over this here, I think you need to know a little bit about her. Tracy Hazzard is an Authority Magazine Inc. columnist, co-host of that's like Quattro, four top ranked podcasts, and co-founder of the largest podcast post-production company in the USA. As a podcast authority strategist, Tracy influences and casts $2 billion worth of branded content and products around the world. Her innovative Podetize method and platform provides brands of all kinds a system to spread their marketing message across media types, from video to podcast to blog, growing an engaged audience and retaining a valuable platform authority. And so we're honored to have Tracy Hazzard, who is just an absolutely great friend, and I'm a little bit of one of my mentors, I like to say, because I've learned so much from her over the last couple of years. So we're honored to have you here today, Tracy, on Mass Media Podcast Summit.
Well, ditto for me. I always learn something from you every time. And I'm always amazed at how you can take a system that is in place and take it all like to the nth degree, because you put in the effort and so many people don't. And I think that's a huge difference, Scott. So this Mass Media Summit, that's like why I'm like trying to tune in every chance I get.
So we got a good thing. It's just the start of the beginning. We talked about this. We started talking about this, a year ago, and started like, okay, let's figure this out. And I was joking with everybody that I planned to really do this October and pushed it out because other things. And let's push it out in November and December. I was like, finally, December 27th, like, I need to actually do this.
You need to actually do this. Yes, I know. We hear a lot of those from our clients as well. So, right? But we got to put things in the time at which we can do them in, right? Where we can really focus and make them happen. So, yeah. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Like, how do we not lose focus, right?
Right.
Pod fading. I hope everybody understands that term. I'm going to share my screen while I'm talking here. But pod fading is a big deal because we have a lot of podcasts that don't make it, that quit their show really quickly. And so we want to really make sure that that's my goal, is to give you ways to prevent that for yourself. And sometimes there are going to be ways that like, this just wasn't right for me and I'm going to pod fade. That's totally okay. You do have to make sure it's a fit for you. But if there's some things you can do that keep this momentum going for you, because it gives you the right reinforcement, right? It gives you feedback loop of where you're really happy. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so you guys know me, but you're seeing me right here. But I wanted to make sure you'll see Tom tomorrow. I don't remember what he's talking about. He said something about audience engagement. I'm not really sure what that's about, but he'll be talking about it tomorrow. And so, what we've managed to do with extremely busy lives here, and, I've got 3 kids, I've got dog, puppy who need a lot of training this last year, right? How do you keep all of this going? And some of it is self-directed, like you've got to plan, you've got to focus, and you've got to do that. But there are other things that are just tactic and techniques, and that's what I want to talk with you about today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we got started. And I'm an ink columnist. I've done all these things, and we've created this VIP pass. But it all started one day with a 3D print podcast. That's right, 3D printing, totally geeky. WTFFF, and FFF stands for Fused Filament Fabrication. And my mother swore that I was swearing. And so she wouldn't listen to the show for a while. And I was like, Mom, it's not a swear, it's a joke. So anyway, we started the show, I guess, now we're almost coming up on 5 years. And so we started it 5 years ago, and we thought that we would just do this exploration on the side of our day jobs. And at that time, we were doing a lot more product designing and everything. And what we discovered in the process really quickly was that no one wanted to buy what we had to sell, what we were testing out, like these idea of doing 3D print product services, but they really wanted the information. And the podcasting part of it was really taking off. And so fast forward to 5 years later here, now we're talking about, we did 560 episodes. We did tons of videos. We did lots of speaking events. It got me my ink column, like all of these things cascaded from what was happening with WTFFF to beginning. But we decided last year that we just couldn't keep it up. Like the topic wasn't important. Our design business had been closed because we were really focusing on our podcast business for the last 3 years, and it took over and we didn't need the income anymore. So we just said, let's shut that down. So the podcast on 3D printing just wasn't of interest to us anymore. Although our listeners keep messaging us, I should say that every week we still get a message saying, hey, are you guys going to start back up again? Hey, when are you going to podcast again? Do you have any advice on this? So they're always asking us that. And so we've recognized that for the last year. But in October, we got a call from Hewlett Packard. And Hewlett Packard says to me, hey, we want to sponsor the show. And I say, you do realize that we haven't been posting new episodes? And they said, yes, we realize that. We'd like you to do new ones and we want to sponsor the show. And I was shocked. I thought, okay, that sounds great. Let's talk about what that looks like. And we signed a deal with them. We'll be doing that I think it's going to come out in April. And it's a 25 episode series totally sponsored by HP. But I sat back and I said to them, our audience declined over the last year. I mean, the subscribers are still there, but we went from 100,000 active listeners to maybe, I think 15,000 or something like that in the amount of time before they called me. And I said, why do you want us to work with you? Why do you want us to sponsor us? And they said, because you dominate the first 5 pages of Google for 3D print podcast. And we spent a year trying to pay to gain that position and write articles ourselves and do all of these things. And we cannot get ourselves into that place. So when someone types in 3D print podcast, you're the only thing that shows up. So we figured, why try to beat you? Why not join you? And so that's how we ended up working with HP. So there's residual value in podcasting, even if you have Podfaded. And that's what we did. We purposefully Podfaded that, let it drop. We didn't tell anyone what we were going to do. We did what most Podfaders do to see what would happen. And now we're going to be able to tell you in a few months what happens when we restart it. So, but the exciting part about it is that there's so much residual value you don't realize that you have. You've built up equity in it if you've done it right. So that's what I want to talk to you about, is that you're not maybe realizing the value that's in it. So let's talk about a dozen ways to prevent pod fading. And while I'm talking to you about those ways, I'm also going to talk to you about the things that are going to create this long-term residual value for you as well. So as I mentioned before, there's 705. I heard something recently that was 740,000 podcasts now. This is from late last year, but I mean, it was probably like September or something, but only 140,000 are active. So that's like an 80% fail rate. I mean, or an 80% quit rate, if you want to talk about it like that. At Podetize, we have less than 12% pod fade rate. And that includes ourselves, right? And less than 12%. And so we have, pretty much flipped the odds there. And we've been doing a study. We have a quiz out there. We have a research paper that's out there and a company that's helping us do this to try to understand more details in it. But a lot of what I'm talking to you is the difference between those that have pod faded. They didn't do most of these things. And the ones that did are still podcasting. So that these are my early indications of what those are. So it's based on a little bit of research, not enough hard data yet. It's not hundreds yet, but we're going to get it there. So I'll be able to, cite that in the future. So there's an old school of podcasting, and I think that's what a lot of us get set up with, and we have this mindset involved. And it's old school is like, it's all about me. I'm the podcast host. Everything sounds great. Like, that's what this is going to create authority and prestige for me. That doing it yourself is totally fine. Like I can just podcast in my car and, it's no big deal. I can set myself up. This is easy. Also, that we get this idea that passive income and advertisement is easy. Like that is also something that's been set up. Monetization is easy. And these things have changed a bit, right? It doesn't still work because there's 75 million plus, and I think it's coming close to 100 million monthly savvy listeners, right? They care, they know podcasts, they care about podcasts. They're listeners every single day. We have pro media competition. We have Gimlet and New York Times and iHeart, and all of those are producing shows. And there are media companies jumping on the bandwagon left and right, because I talk to them all the time with influencers doing podcasts, celebrities wanting to do podcasts, and they're professionally produced. So we're competing against that. The ad model is completely broken too. Podcast advertising is based on radio and TV. And that's not what podcasting is like. It's very different. And if we really look at the advertising model for podcasting, it's actually a lot more like product, which is how Tom and I designed Podetize. So we believe that's why it's working. It's because we understood how you sell products, and selling services is very similar to that. And so if we look at the ad model in a different way, and it's not in brand building and it's not localized, we're going to start looking at it as a different model. And so that's why the old model is broken. And that's what a lot of the systems are built on, whether you're applying into something like Libsyn and trying to apply into their program, or you're going with a Megaphone or any one of those companies that are doing advertising. The model's based on CPM, low dollars, low traction, because they believe that there's low conversion. And there is, in the way that they're sort of, I'm going to call it shotgun approach to advertising. So many are starting to pay for listeners too. That's something that's not being told to most people. But when there are launches and startups of new podcasts, almost all of the big media companies are paying for ads. So they're paying to get those early listeners in the first 12 weeks. And so that's also happening though at the marketing, I'm going to call it agency level. Those type of people who are pushing out podcasts for their clients, they're also doing that. They're paying ads to promote shows. So it's not as organic as it used to be. So you're not really an early entrant. That's why it's not working quite as well. But there is a new school. We call it brandcasting instead of podcasting over here. And we call it that's what our goal is. Our goal is to create a proper listener experience and look at our show from that perspective. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have the right listeners who want what we have to sell or want what we have to give, then it's not going to be a great experience both ways. It's not going to be great for them, and it's not going to be great for us as the host. And we're going to quit our show. We're going to Podfade. We have to have as much professionalism as we can afford. And there are low-cost ways of doing that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, just raising your professionalism. There are some things that we should concentrate on. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to go into a studio. None of those things at that media company level have to happen to still have a professional show. And then we want to make sure we're creating the right influence and the right authority for our business, for our focus, for what we are hoping to accomplish with our podcast. Not necessarily the idea of what podcast the industry says we should be creating. It's influence and authority in your model of success. So that's what I want you guys to do. Can you type into the chat? I'd love to see what motivates you to podcast. Just put the number down, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So if it's numbers, put 1. If it's listeners, put 2. If it's guest networking, that's what motivates you to keep podcasting. That's 3. If it's engagement, then do that for 4. Conversion and sales of 5. If you've got something that I haven't even mentioned here, I want to see that too. So let's pull that, so let's check that out and make sure and just type that in. I'm going to check it a little bit later because I want to keep moving and I want to talk with you a little further, but kind of keep that in mind. And as I go through it, maybe some things are going to occur to you that this is what drives me. So attract and keep listeners is one of the first section of my 12 things. So I've kind of broken them into sections for you, but because of the model of brandcasting, right? Because of this new school. So attracting and keeping listeners. If we can attract and keep listeners, then we're going to keep motivated and we won't pod fade as easily. So let's talk about some things that attract and keep listeners. Oops, I'm getting that little beep on here. You got to get your face off your cover art. Like I say this so often to people, but they don't always listen to this. It is not about you, right? They don't know who these random people are. And one of these days, one of you is going to be in my chat and I'm going to feel so embarrassed by that. But, hey, so this idea of putting your face on your cover art was early on a way to create this sort of podcast celebrity. But as we're getting to 740,000 podcasts and the celebrities are joining in, it's hard to know who you are, right? I mean, the guy in the middle on 5-Minute Marketing, he doesn't even have his name on his cover art. So I have no idea who that is, but he looks like he's been marketing all of 5 minutes. So we really don't want that to be occurring and that impression to being left by our show. So we want to treat it a little more like a blind date. We should absolutely have your name on the show. It should be your show as far as hosting goes, but it's not about you. And an image expresses that you have this kind of vanity going on. So let's look at some that, are a little better. This is one of my favorites, the Successful Thinker. I love the way this looks because you're also not even sure. I mean, technically that's a woman there, but it's a little androgynous. And so you kind of have this, like it could be for a man, it could be for a woman. It doesn't make that sort of significant statement that only men are successful thinkers or only women are. It has impactful, it's straightforward. It gets the message across about what the show might be like. It gives you the energy, literally, of the show. This is another one of my favorites, Dr. Peter McGraw. I'm not joking. The interesting part was I met a comedian at an event that I was doing, and I invited her to come on my show, Feed Your Brand. And she did, and she was fantastic. And she said, hey, I just did a podcast recently. I just did the show I'm Not Joking. And I said, oh, that's one of my podcasters. And she says, did you guys create that cover art? And I said, yes. And she says, it's the reason I came on the show. I just loved it and thought, I want to be associated with that show. I want to share that cover art and say I was featured there. So that's really powerful in making sure that it, if I share a picture of you, is that really valuable to me? So it's also thinking about this from a guest standpoint. This one's really impactful, and we did make this look actually a little bit more like Peter. We changed the hair color and made it look a little more, so it still has a little bit of self-referential, almost like it's an inside joke at the end of the day. This one I like too, Divorce Matters. It's a corporate podcast because it's, hosted by a law firm, but it stands out really big and small, and it sets a different tone than you would expect for a law firm. You could have put all the lawyers on the cover of it. And I've seen many podcasts that are like that. And that would have just been terrible. Like who wants to see that? Who wants to listen to that show? You can use the host's image. You can use your image in a witty way that's a little more creative. This is Dr. Elizabeth Hafer, Is Your Head On Straight? Great show. It is actually a picture of her we've altered with this, crooked head. It's a chiropractor's show, but it expresses her personality and it's witty. That's a better use of it if you really want to kind of keep that branding going of yourself. Let's move on to the second thing. The second thing you could do, and this is something so many people skip. If on our side, when we set up shows, we do this, but if we didn't set up a customer show and they come to us, I can guarantee you 99% of the time, they will not have done this if they set themselves up prior to mid-year last year. Writing a 4,000 character description. Most people go, oh, but all that ever shows on the little iTunes link is on the little iTunes summary is like 3 sentences. So, maybe 250 characters, that kind of thing. And so, why bother? Why bother? Because the bot that controls the search engine that serves up your podcast to all of the people in Apple, in Stitcher, and all of the places that they might be listening, the search engines that do that, search your title, your subtitle, your tags, and your description. So if you are not using the full 4,000 characters, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity to build out and cover all the key words in your potential marketplace, all the reasons why people should want to listen to you. So if you haven't done it yet, here's my exercise for you. Here's my job for you. Now, you could use your intro episode if you have a really good one, if you really like your very first intro episode. But if you haven't done that, or if your intro episode isn't, your favorite, and for many podcasters, it's not their favorite because it was the one they kind of stumbled through. This is we call it the 15-minute exercise. And if you take this and do this 15-minute exercise and then transcribe it and then rewrite it into 4,000 characters, you'll be able to come up with exactly what's needed in your own words, in words that are layman's terms, because if you sat down to write the 4,000 characters, what you would do is you would overthink it. You would not be using common terms. You'd be using industry terms and perhaps things that people wouldn't be asking for or looking for in that kind of way. So the way that we do it is we say for 5 to 7 minutes, start about the listener. Just record. Do not write this. Record it, and you don't have to air it. Doesn't have to be about that, but record all the things that you're thinking about the listener. Where do they aspire to be? What are their problems? Where are they right now? What's their journey going on? What are they looking for? Why are they out there looking for a podcast in your particular subject matter? What can they hope to gain from listening to your show? Like all different things like that. But it's not about you. It's all about them at that beginning portion. The second part, now you move on and you maybe do 3 to 5 minutes. That's about you. Why you, though, not your whole resume. This is not your whole story. You save that for the actual podcast. This is why are you relevant to deliver on the promise of the show, on the promise of the name of the show, on the promise of the premise you've given, like what your show is about. Why are you uniquely suited to be that host? That's what you want to get across. Now, in there, you should get across some credibility items like, I'm an columnist. I know a lot about media. Like you'd want to have that come across, but you don't necessarily want a recitation of your resume. And then the third thing is, your show. For most of my clients, they haven't built their show yet. So this is their imagine what your show is like. So, but you know what your show is like. So this is what you can expect with my guests, who I brought on, who I will bring on in the future. What are the show expectations? What will they get from listening to your show? And how's it structured? Like you're going to give them this. I have, don't miss out. I have a binge factor feature on every episode of Feed Your Brand Center of Influence, where I talk to great podcasters and I get to the details of what makes their show bingeable. That sounds great, doesn't it? Wouldn't you want to listen to that if you were a podcaster? So you want to put something like that into your show expectations. So you do it about 15 minutes, because it'll give you plenty of extra words and sentences and things to move around, and you'll be able to narrow that down to 4,000 characters. And you want to still write that first 3 sentences in a way that covers actually one of each of these things. So you'll read the opening paragraph will always be 3 sentences. One will be about the listener, why they're in the right place if they choose this podcast, who you are, and why you are the host and why you should be listened to. And then a little bit of like what they're going to get. And if you take one sentence from each of those and you put those as your first 3 sentences of your description, you're also going to help out with the short summary of what most people read. Remember, the bots read the 4,000 characters. Real people read the 250. So we want to keep that going for you there too. The next thing you can amp up to get a more professional show that it will attract listeners better is intro outros. And here's the thing, like I've had a couple of podcasters who recently decided to redo their intro, and they went and did it themselves. They decided that they just didn't, want to bother with going through the whole process of finding a person on Fiverr, like doing it the way that they had set it up first. So they thought, I'll just intro myself. And the sound, the music mix, like everything was awful. And their show starts to drop in listenership, and they aren't sure what's going on. They also had a lot harder time getting guests to come back. And so getting guests to come on, because people weren't saying it was a great experience because they were not as happy with sharing the show with this less professional intro. So keeping that in mind, that intro outros, and you can do your own outro from a voiceover. I don't recommend it, because as long as you're there, you might as well use a voiceover artist, but doing a professional intro outro can really set you apart. Here are the 3 things that we hear from listeners. This is from listeners, not hosts, that they care the most about. They like music. It gives them a cue. Like they like to see that. They know the intro's over and the show is starting. When you don't have that, there's not that segregation between them. It doesn't give them the sense of, oh, they started in already. Like it gets confusing for them. So make sure to have that happen, and keep it so that it sets the tone for your show, though. So you don't have like this amped up, energetic music, and then you're podcasting in a meditative tone. Like we don't want to have those contrasts, right? Scott, you've heard them before. It's happened. Yep. We want to keep the tone the same. So we want to set the energy level for your show and do that, but also don't overpower with the music. That's why you might want a professional to mix it for you. That's why we do it for our clients. You want to make it shorter. That's the one request I get from podcast listeners everywhere. Can you please have a shorter intro? And so that's because, remember, your best listeners are the binge listeners, right? And they're going to listen to one after another, and they don't want to hear this 3-minute intro. They can't stand that. So if you can make your intro 30 seconds, it's preferred. So try to make it shorter. You can keep your outro a little bit longer if you've got a call to action that's important, because you earn the right to have that. But even still, a minute is too long. And so really try to keep it on the shorter side. And then the most important thing is, like I said before, not your voice. Trying to go for the voice of authority is really important. It sets a transition between I am a real professional podcast host and I'm being introduced properly. It wouldn't work out well here if Scott didn't introduce me and I just did my own startup on this summit. It wouldn't have been set up. You chose to come and listen to the summit because Scott's the host here. Really, he's in charge of it. He curated all of us to come and bring you information. So if he doesn't transfer that authority for this hour to me, then it's not really going to be powerful when I deliver it. And so you're losing the impact of the power of your show if you don't have that transition happen from a voice of authority to you. So this is why it's critically important. Make sure you set that up. It's not expensive. It's super easy to do.
Can I answer that, Tracy?
Yes, please.
I'm doing that now recently with my YouTube videos of taking the extra time on my podcast episodes and sending it and adding the same intro that I do for my podcast to my YouTube channel. And I've started seeing more people really enjoying that and sticking around longer, actually. My average plays have gone up because they like that, which is really nice.
Yeah, well, we just had a podcaster who had changed out his intro and there was sound problems, which is what I'm going to talk to next. And he had he had Pat Flynn on his show.
Yeah. Ooh.
And the sound was terrible. Like there was nothing we could do to fix it. And the intro was bad, like the whole thing. And you can imagine that Pat Flynn would not share that and not recommend other podcasters go on his show. So he missed an opportunity by not taking control of that.
Mm.
So really, really important here. So there's probably a lot of you got told as you were starting up, oh, go record in your car. Like that was the early advice. Go record in your car or use your phone and hook a microphone to it. And what I can tell you is that that's the worst advice ever. So the ones that record in their car, there are beeping going on. There's a lot of glass around you. You don't realize how much a sound bounces off actually in a car until you listen back to the recording. It sounds like it would be great, but it's not. Now, recording in a closet is the other one that comes up a lot, and it's great, but if you're actually doing video, it's very unprofessional. So remember I was telling you that I was interviewing that comedian, and so that comedian, she was in her closet, and she wasn't in her closet because of the sound. I mean, although that was great that she was doing that, but she was in her closet because it was literally the only place in her small apartment where she could get away from dogs and roommates. And so she had no choice but to be in this closet. And during the middle of the interview, and we're doing video, pieces of clothing are starting to come down in front of her face, like just a little bit as she's talking, and she's trying to shove them out of the way. And because she was a comedian, I let it go because that was pretty funny. If I had just been doing audio, I would go pause, Stephanie, go fix this. Go ahead. It's okay. No problem. Right. That kind of thing. But it was comedic. So I left it on the video. But that's the kind of, when you don't feel professional, then you're not going to deliver as professional a hosting, right? You're not going to be in your element. You're not going to be at your best. So we want to make that happen. But if you improve your sound at the environment level first, you can use cheap equipment. You do not have to have amazing, expensive equipment if you have an environment that doesn't have a lot of hard surfaces, that doesn't have a lot of echo. You can really change the sound level right then and there at the recording level. And I hear this from recording engineers everywhere. I mean, it's why they work so hard to control their sound boosts, right? Because they need to make that initial recording so that they do less work later. So if you're paying for editing and you're paying for the other side of it, that's a lot more work on the other end if you don't have it recorded properly to begin with. So we try to provide a feedback loop for our clients and it help them improve. But sometimes a show starts out really well and then something goes wrong. And in this particular case with this host, the reason his sound quality was so bad was we think there's an equipment failure happening, whether it might be a cable or a microphone. So one good thing is to make sure that you listen back to your audio every now and again, your raw audio, and just take a quick listen and make sure there's no clicking sounds, no interference, no crackling going on. It can happen. I traveled with my mic once and the top of it came a little loose. And luckily it was making the sound while I was recording. So I was hearing that it was happening, but it took me, 30 minutes to try to figure out what was wrong and what was going on. And it was just simply that the top of my microphone was loose. And once I tightened it, the connection was fine and the crackle went away. But that would have been in the audio and I would have lost a really great interview if I had let that go. So controlling that at the front is really important. And getting the right mic is really important too. Tom spent a lot of time studying all the microphones in the marketplace. And so he's got podetize.com/mic. And this is you're you're talking long tail blog posts, like really long tail blog posts. Like, I mean, 10,000, probably maybe even 20. So it's really long. So skip to the mics you're interested in. I'm working on trying to get him to help me make a graphic out of it, so it'll all be really pretty for each one of you. But all the mic comps are there, and you can really take a look at your mic. We recommend the ATR 2005. That's the one that we recommend. Has a slightly more professional sound. But the reason we recommend it is because I know you all aren't controlling your environment. There's a lot of great mics out there that are expensive, but they are beautiful sound. But your environment is making that microphone sound terrible. And that's what we get. We get a lot of that with the Yeti and with the Heil. And I'm trying to think of the other one, that there's another one that's similar, like the ones that are all in the round that record around you. Those pick up the sounds in the environment. And they really aren't great if you're not in a sound controlled booth, or if you're not doing an interview where the person is on the other side of you. So you definitely want one of those, kind of getting the surround sound, right, going for you, getting the recording from that angle if you're recording 2 of you in a space or 3 of you in a space. So those are really important. And then, I'm just going to make a little shameless plug because that's our microphone over it. But look, here it actually is. Here's the prototype of it. I'm so excited about it. We got the second one today, came in the mail. And so we're really excited about our new microphone, because wouldn't it be great if we could use a microphone that's similar to this, but while we're out in the field, never have any cables or plugs or anything, and always know that our recording's at a greater sound level. And this has a better sound capture than any other microphone because there's no cable taking it to your computer. It's actually recording right at this mic flag base. So we're excited about that one. That's coming out in the near future. The next set of help that I have for you, the next set of ways to stop pod fading, are all about boosting numbers and exposure. Now, I want to be really careful here, because a lot of the numbers out there are vanity numbers. Like they only matter because you want to be the person who goes, I got 100,000 listeners. But some of those numbers don't mean anything. Juliet was mentioning earlier today when she was talking about that there was research done with a large social media companies, and the research showed that those influencers with really large numbers actually had some of the lowest conversion rates. They weren't making the most money. And so when we look at that, that's not always the number, but sometimes we need to boost our numbers to get us something, to get us the bigger guests that we need, to get us the right type of advertisers that we're looking for. And then other times it doesn't matter whether we went from 100,000 to 12,000 listeners, HP still wants to work with us. So those are the numbers that I want you to concentrate on and to boost here. And so that's what I'm going to do. But also in that, we want to expose ourselves to more listeners, because if we're just boosting numbers only within the podcast space and we're not helping ourselves get to maybe readers and viewers and other places where people are out there looking for us, we're isolating ourselves to audio learners only, right? People are only listening via audio. We want to boost your exposure this way. I want to say start with video. Scott's been brilliant at bringing this to the forefront. He does it really well. Going YouTube Live is fantastic. There's Instagram TV, there's Facebook Live, but and we're starting here in Zoom. How much more simple can it be? Almost everyone I know is a coach who uses Zoom or has done interviews with other podcasters via Zoom or other videocasters. So starting with video and recording everything, why not do that? It's not a lot more money. It's not a lot more time. It's a little bit more bandwidth on your computer, and you got to have a Dropbox to save it in. But other than that, it's just a little more space. And today you can get terabytes of space over at Dropbox, right? So it's not that hard. So why not do it? Because your opportunity to put it into YouTube, to put it into Vimeo, to put it into all of these other places where you can share video on LinkedIn video does really well. It has under 10 minutes. Facebook, you all know video is doing really well, and doing live there is even better. You can create watch parties with your videos. Those have been fantastic. Juliet and I have been doing the Marketing Monday Mixers on Monday nights on Facebook, and our watch parties are getting tremendous amount of people and engagement from them, of people I didn't even really know were my fans. I had no idea they were out there, but they're starting to watch the watch party every single week and starting to talk to me now. So we're getting that engagement going, and it's no different than I was sharing those same episodes and same information before, but now I'm sharing it in a media type that people want. and they love video. A lot of video watchers out there. I think the last number I heard was there was 1.5 billion videos watched on YouTube every single day. I'm pretty sure my daughter, my 10-year-old, consumes about 100 a day. I every time I check her numbers, I'm like, how in the world did she watch that many videos? How did she go through that many hours on her phone? So we also want to syndicate everywhere, right? Because if we're starting with a video, we want to make sure we're putting it everywhere. And I was just talking about YouTube and Vimeo, but there's also opportunities to try some of the new media: Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV. These are all places you can put your video. You can put audiograms, but it's not as effective as putting video, because so many of us, us included here, just got rid of our cable. We no longer have cable. We no longer have DirecTV. We all have streaming services now. And so and I can tell you, it's so frustrating going through Hulu. The other night I was like, let's just go to bed. I can't stand it anymore. There's nothing to watch here. But now if I could go and watch my favorite podcast and make use of that time, wouldn't that be great? We have a couple of podcasters who've done this, and we syndicate for our video casters to Roku, Apple, and Fire without any additional charge through a company called E360. And so it's an app that you would download on Roku, on Fire TV, and you download the E360 app and they can watch anything. And we have one show that's about Peloton, and Peloton does amazing on Roku. So we really expect that show is going to get picked up and watched in addition to those that are already doing the Peloton exercise programs that are already on Roku. So now they're in the right environment where their listeners and viewers might want to be. So syndicating in these places, especially when it doesn't cost you something, is highly worth it. These are all the places that we syndicate our clients. There's more added all the time. We're always looking at the new thing. Keep in mind that for audio, Apple still has 69% of the marketplace. Spotify, even though they're up and coming and the people are claiming, oh, they're second, no, they're first, like all of that, they have a lot of listeners, but they're still not actually listening. They have a lot of potential, but they're not all listening every single day. They're not subscribing in the same way that they are on Apple Podcasts. So Apple Podcasts still has the giant market share. What we are seeing, though, is that Google, your website, is the next actual biggest area where people listen. And that's highly underutilized, and people don't expect that. And many, many people don't actually put their podcast player on their website. So that's another area that we do that, but you want to make sure that you're doing that as well. There's a lot of mistakes that happen in trying to become bingeable. So we think, oh, we've got to do 5 days a week. We've got to do it for years. We've got to have hundreds of episodes. And while that works, there are also other ways. We could create a seasonal boost. We could create a series. We can create things that give us that sort of fear of missing out going on, right? So there are other things that you can do with your show that helps give you that break that you might need, but allow you to keep podcasting and doing it in the right way. Now, there's a lot of mistakes that get made there too, though. When you plan a seasonal break, so let's say you really just got to take a couple months off in the summer. You just can't keep going. That's perfectly okay. Totally understand it. One of our daughters got married and we were like, we couldn't podcast for a couple of months. As soon as it was over, and our listeners knew, because we were posting images of one of the favors was 3D printed. So our listeners on our 3D print podcast were like, okay, the wedding's over. When are you coming back? Like that kind of thing. So they still push you. But, taking that break, they're excited to come back with you. But there are a couple mistakes you can make. One of the mistakes is that many of the algorithms out there on the apps that are the listener apps don't push your podcast forward if you haven't published an episode in more than 30 days. So it's like you drop out of being pushed to the subscriber base. It's not that those subscribers aren't there. It's just that in order for them to know you have a show, they have to go, hey, I haven't heard anything from that podcast in a while. Let me go check and see if they have new shows, because it's not pushing through into their feed. So what I like to recommend is every 25 days or so during your break, pre-plan and record them ahead of time. Record a promo about what you're working on and what's coming in the new season. So just kind of like, hey, we're retooling. We're getting really excited. We're also getting through this wedding that's been going on, but we've got some new content for you and we can't wait to share it. And it's going to be coming out September 1st. So stick with us, and hey, keep engaging with us on Facebook. We love to hear from you. do that, because it doesn't really matter if it's a short episode, it's something, but you're touching base and it's pushing through to their feed, keeping them active. And so every 25 days, make sure you're putting one of those through. That's so every 3 weeks, think about it that way. And if you do that, you're going to keep your listener base and your subscriber base. And so then when you come back with the new season, you don't have this feeling. And this is why a lot of people quit when they come back with the new season or that kind of planned break. They lost their listeners, or they seem to have lost their listeners. And the reality is it's just this algorithm push thing that is not happening anymore. So this will help alleviate that so that you'll hit the ground running and you'll still get your listeners keep sticking around waiting for you. In fact, they might be really excited to see you. The other thing that you can do is dominate the feed volumes with volumes, right? Dominating your feed. So by having spinoffs, so when you get over 300 episodes, Apple stops serving you up. So they stop serving up that early ones. And so they drop off your early episodes. So if you started at 1, your second episode will be there. Like, it keeps dropping off as it goes. What we recommend is when you hit 300, you take 100 and you roll them off into a volume 1. And so it's so like the app guy here, he has episodes 1 to 100. You can go 101 to 200, and you keep doing that so you never lose these episodes. But also what happens is when somebody is searching for your podcast and they see all these series, or they see all these volumes, like Scott has different nights and he's spun them into their own series. So Note Night in America has its own series. Like, when you start to see that happening, then you start to think, wow, this is a real player in the marketplace. This person's committed to podcasting. I'm going to listen to their show. I'm definitely going to do it. And even if you start with the most recent, they're going to know these old episodes are there. But if you lose that back catalog volume and that value of that, that's a loss for you. So when I look at my show, so remember I told you that our WTFFF show, it's 3 Fs, WTFFF show had 560 episodes. We had to split those into volumes, right? So we have them split up that way. And because of that, what happens is that our early episodes are actually some of our most listened to still. And when I looked at how our listenership dropped over time, those were actually some of the ones that were still getting the most listens, because people had found it, started listening to it, newly subscribed to it, and hadn't caught up yet to the rest of the 560 episodes. So that's really telling to me that the value is in making sure that you have access to your entire catalog. Now, some people do it like in a tighter way where they create a show that is premium and the archives are premium. You can do that here, but I don't recommend it. I think giving it away for free and putting it as a part of the feed and the volumes here does more for you than the small amount of subscribers you might get on that entire volume. So now, that being said, curating a whole entire season and volume. So like, we're just about to do this with our Feed Your Brand show. Our Feed Your Brand is our show for podcasters. So it's the podcast for podcasters. And I've been doing this interview series called The Center of Influence. And what I've discovered in it is that the part that people are most interested in, the listeners that have reached out to me are saying, I love when you talk about the bingeability of a show. When you say, this is why this show is bingeable, listen up and you should emulate this. I love it when you do that because it's amazing. And so it's got me thinking that I needed to rebrand my show. I needed to spin it off into its own thing, take all of the Center of Influence shows, put them into one package. And now it's going to be called The Binge Factor. So it's about to come out. We're going to re-release all of those episodes, and all the new Center of Influence that I would have done are now going to be called The Binge Factor. So that's going to be coming up in February. So I'm excited about that. We're still finalizing the cover art, so I don't have it to show you here. But now I will have Feed Your Brand and The Binge Factor will be the 2 shows that will show up for almost the exact same search terms, because they're about the same thing. They just have a little bit of nuance difference. But if someone wants to learn how to podcast, or the tactics or the techniques or things that you might do to amp up your show, you're going to go to Feed Your Brand. And if you really want to hear from podcasters, you're going to go to the Binge Factor. So now I've created and segregated my system so that I don't end up at that 300 show problem, but I've segregated them in a way that also is useful to the listeners. So they will either subscribe to both or subscribe to the one they want the most, instead of skipping around on my episodes. So that's useful as well. Remember, I said that one of the biggest places that people listen is on your actual home. Well, embedding at home is the most valuable thing you can do, but the second most valuable thing you can do is make sure that it's a WordPress site. And I say that because we've managed Squarespace, Wix, we've managed hard-coded sites, we've managed sites that were, I can't even tell you what the systems that they were used are. They all go wrong. They do not track with Google algorithm. So they don't get served up in the search at the same pace that WordPress sites do. And for some keywords in some areas, that means you will have lost out on 60% search traffic. So 30 to 60% is the average difference that you'll see by just being on the wrong platform. So minimum, if you need to talk to me about this or our team about this, we convert to WordPress all the time for our clients. It's the most significant change you can make. So make sure that you have a home base, that you're putting your podcast in that home base, that people can actually listen to it in your home base, and that your home base is a WordPress site. Those are the things that you can do that will have the most significance, and you'd be surprised at the boost to your overall numbers, because now you get to look at your Google Analytics. If you're hosted with Podetize, we actually put your podcast statistics and your website statistics side by side. So you'll be able to see where you're ranking and how you're growing in organic keywords and traffic. And we have most clients who come to us and never tracked that before. They'll start to see a 30% growth month over month if they start doing the next thing I'm going to suggest to you, which is more of making sure that you're taking all of your information away from the authority thieves, meaning Libsyn should not be your player. It should never be the place you share. Podbean, Spotify, Apple, these are not the places for you to share out links. You should always share your blog page with the episode player in it. That's what you should be sharing for your show. Because otherwise, you're just giving Libsyn and Blog Talk Radio and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you're giving them the credit. You're not capturing those listeners back to you. So if you're doing that on Facebook, they're Facebook fans maybe, or they're Facebook random people, and they haven't necessarily subscribed into your page or your group. So you still don't know who they are. And instead of sending them to your website where you'll either be able to pixel them or track them, or hopefully they'll subscribe and get into your email list, where instead of doing that, you're sending them out to Apple, you're sending them out to Spotify, Libsyn. Why do that? They belong to you, and that's the core thing you need to bring back to yourself. So with that, you got to have a blog, right? But you don't have to work that hard at the blog. It needs to be set in the verbal SEO, meaning we don't want to change what we say. We don't want to write a blog. We want to transcribe a blog. And that's what we do here at Podetize for many of our clients. We make sure that there's a transcription. Now, the transcription has to be done right. There shouldn't be any time tags, date tags, that kind of thing. There shouldn't be any tags that say Scott says, Tracy says. There shouldn't be anything. It needs to look like a normal blog post. It needs to have images in it. It needs to have a heading. It needs to have all of those normal blog things to it. But you're using the words from the transcription almost exactly. You do want to clean up ums, ahs, repeated words, things like that, things that don't make sense, but you don't want to clean up or change and rewrite anything. And I know that's really hard for you authors out there and you writers to not fix it. But if you don't fix it, I can tell you that you're going to tap into a higher organic search traffic, and the verbal SEO is more powerful. The other thing that it does is that it puts you in the right place at the right time. It puts you where search is happening. So, it's great that when we do like a radio show and we had a specific time slot that we were going, but that wasn't great. That's why podcasting came about, because I want to listen wherever and whenever I want to that particular show. So that's why radio started, that radio model started dying, right? Well, we're the same thing for everything that we consume nowadays. We want it as a listener, as a reader, as a viewer, we want it on our schedule. We want it to be where we are and when we need it, right? So we want it to be 2 a.m, especially if we're in pain. So you want to also be in the right place at the right time, because most search happens on Google. We have 1.3% conversion rates happening on social media. We have 13% conversion rates happening for ads and posts and things like that on Google. And why is that? It's because people are in need. They're searching for something on social. They're looking at dog pictures and kid pictures and stuff like that, right? So we're putting us in the place where people are actually looking for things. And, it was pretty telling when HP said, we Googled 3D print podcast and you dominated the first 5 pages. They didn't say, we went to Apple and we looked at what 3D print podcasts were there and yours was the only one or yours was one of 5. They didn't say that because we probably weren't top ranked at that moment because we hadn't been posting episodes. They said, we went to Google and Googled for the best 3D print podcasts and you showed up, right? So that's what you want to make sure that you're showing up for. You need to be consistent and constant because Apple, as I mentioned, that's why their algorithm will start pushing you out, stop pushing you out because you haven't posted in 30 days. Everyone rewards consistency and constancy. When you create at least 1 episode per week on schedule, you get it done, you bring it there, then you are creating value. And so they want to reward that value by sending you more search traffic. We posted every single day. We did 5 days a week for the first year. The second year, about 18 months later, we lowered it down to 3 times a week. Then we went to 2 times a week. Then we went to 1 time a week. And we didn't really lose our traffic during that whole time. Our ranking and all of those things stayed consistent. In fact, they grew. So our rankings via Google was growing month over month over month. It didn't matter that our content pace was lowering. How long? This is one of the things that there's been a significant study coming out about YouTubers and other things, and that those doing short content are actually not doing as well. They don't make as much money. They don't create raving fans that convert. There's a lot of things wrong with not creating long enough content. It's the number one question I get when I give a talk to newbie podcasters or aspiring podcasters. How long does this need to be? Well, at the end of the day, our goal is to make a really great long tail a blog post, and that needs to be at least 3,000 to 6,000 words. So we want to talk for 15 to 20 minutes. If we talk less than that, we don't get that amount of word count. Now, I talk really fast, so maybe I could do it, but most people can't. So we want to make sure that that's happening for you. So having these short format 5-minute, short shows are not actually serving your audience as well. Now, that doesn't mean that if you've got 1 show a week, like on Monday, you do a meditation, and on Thursday, you're doing your long tail. That's okay because you're just giving a different feature. You're just spreading them out. That's an okay model. But if you can create longer content, at least 20 minutes is what I try to go for when it's solo show. If it's an interview show, I want to go 40 to minutes to an hour, somewhere in there. I don't really think the super long shows are doing as well anymore, and that's what we're hearing. I have no hard data on it, but we're hearing the shows that are an hour and a half or longer are not doing as well anymore, and so slightly under the hour is doing better right now. So keeping that in mind, though, there's another reason for it. When you want to start taking ads, whether you're doing you're going to do passive ads over YouTube, or you're going to be doing ads in any kind of ad program, or even with your own ads on podcasts. If you have a shorter show, you can't cram in enough you don't have enough real estate to put ads on. And so those that do change from 10 minutes to 15 minutes on YouTube were able to increase their ad monetization by 30%. So they got almost a third more money by just adding 5 minutes of time to their show. So be thinking about that, because you don't know where your show is going to go in the future. And if you set your show up with this sort of smaller format, you may find out you're wrong. Now, that being said, Scott and I both interviewed someone from the Buffer podcast, right? And they said, marketers don't want to listen to more than 10 minutes. And so, but you know what? They were never going to advertise because the show was completely sponsored by Buffer. Different model. That works. So make sure you do listen to your listeners. And if they're not the kind that are going to listen long, you better cut your show short. Let's see. Oop, I got a little off. There we go. Word count, right? This is what we want. Google loves 3,000 plus words. Absolutely they do. That's why HP couldn't pay to unseat us, because they couldn't pay someone to write a long enough article. That's really what happened there. They didn't understand that, but that's what they thought. That's what was actually happening there. Amping up your podcast titles really matter. making sure they're engaging, educating, encouraging. But more importantly, you need to make sure they're tapping into keywords, whether it's search words on whether they're searching on iTunes or they're searching on Google, doesn't matter, because those terms will show up your show, right? Will make sure your show. So having cutesy, catchy names is great. I like to do that and then put a colon and then put something that's longer. Maybe you don't see the whole thing. You may not see the whole thing when you're trying to look at it on iTunes, but that the words are all there. You have a longer count for the title, for the headline. Use it. Use the full character count, right? I remember we were talking about that on description. Use that on your headlines and on your titles for the show as well, because you want to make sure that you're capturing the possibility of search and making sure people understand that. So cute and catchy, but with then information on what they're getting. Make sure that you're making it visual and you're mixing it up. This is a mistake that most people make. They're like, it's an audio show. People don't care about the visuals. They care about the visuals. They absolutely care, because they care when they're sharing it. Your guest cares when they have to go out and share it. We need to make it impactful. We want to mix it up. We also don't want it to become like this. Oops. We don't want it to become like this, where everything looks exactly the same again and again and again. Imagine if this is in your Facebook feed and it would look the same thing like this as well. Anyone who's on Instagram knows that if you did something like this consistently and not, planned it out and separated it all, then it would be too much as well. And so we don't want to be wearing the same clothes. We don't want our overbranding going on. Because people think they've seen it, they've read it, they've heard it before, and they won't click. And that's what we want to avoid. I was talking about stats before. We got to measure all our stats, right? We got to make sure that we're measuring the ones that give us authority, that give us a boost. I'm 5'2". I can use every inch I can get in my authority, right? So we want to have that happen, right? Metrics prevent pod fading, right? I hear that again and again, and I'm going to check in our chat later, but this is what's going on when we see that. But here's the metrics you should be looking at. Website, especially your organic traffic and your organic keyword growth. If you're not growing month over month with your show, then you're making a mistake in how you're putting it together, how you're blogging it. You're not doing some of the things that I was suggesting before. You should be seeing that consistent growth happening because you're posting consistent content. So if you're posting every week, the consistent growth should be happening as well. So there might be a website problem. There might be a way that you're blogging it problem, whatever those are. If these are any of your problems and you're not seeing that on your end, please get in touch with me, get in touch with Tom. We're happy to help you figure it out and analyze that. You should be seeing engagement grow. And for a lot of people, this is why they like Podfade at 11 episodes. The Podfade places are 11, 25, and 100. Those are the most common places that people Podfade. And then over 500 is the next place. But the engagement is the reason. You thought that people would start immediately going, oh my God, I love your show. It's so great. People don't always do that, especially podcast listeners. Real, true, engaged podcast listeners who become fans prefer shows that have 25 episodes already in the queue. It's kind of like you go to Netflix. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but you go to Netflix and you check out the show and you're like, it only has one season. There's a really good chance they're going to leave me hanging and I'm not going to get a season 2. So I'm going to look at the date. Is a season 2 really coming before I decide I'm going to take the time to watch this? Because I'm just going to get hung and I'm going to get annoyed. So people do that. Real, true binge listeners do this. They look for the shows that they see that the host is committed to keeping and going forward. And for that, the metric is 25 episodes because that's a whole page on iTunes. So you'll see 25 before you have to scroll. Email list growth. If you're not sending them back to your website, then someone's stealing your authority. You're not bringing back that. If that list growth isn't qualified, there's a mismatch between your listenership and your show. Then you need to take a listen, because maybe what you thought was happening wasn't happening. Maybe you thought that you were going to be getting people who were newbies to podcasting on our Feed Your Brand show, and actually everyone already is a podcaster. I got to change my show. I got to listen to that. So being able to ensure that it's qualified for what I was looking for, the reason I was starting the show, or I need to pivot my show to look at the people that are attracted to me and find something to serve them with. Views, listens, stickiness. If we keep that in our website, we have a stickiness factor. That gives us a lot of Google points and a lot of Google growth opportunity. embed your videos into your website from YouTube, because Google owns YouTube. So use the YouTube player and embed that. You want to have podcast players in your site, because if someone finds you from Google, if someone finds you from out there and they go to your site, they're not necessarily going to go immediately and subscribe. They might want to just take a quick listen or a quick view before they go further. Maybe though, they'll sit there and watch the whole video, listen to the whole episode. Now you have raised up and someone has sat on your website, seen your sidebar, seen your menu, done all of that for 20 minutes. That's really great. It keeps them in your site and with you, and not getting distracted by all the other podcasts and videos that are out there and getting served up to them. Clients, products, sales. At the end of the day, that might be your goal, to be in that place where you're selling products, where you're selling programs, where you're getting new clients, coaching clients, high-end clients, whatever that might be. That sales metric is a metric. And so it'll happen very often where someone will say, I only have 100 listeners to my show. And I'll talk to them and say, well, so it's not feeling really worth it for you. So tell me a little bit about that. What have you seen? Have you got any new clients from that? Oh yeah, I got a $10,000 client. So 100 listeners and you got a $10,000 client from that. Whoa, doesn't that sound worth your time? Doesn't that sound worth an hour a week? So we start talking about that sometimes you're not actually looking at the warm-up factor. Is your conversion rate on your sales going quicker? Like that can happen too. So you might be able to close sales faster because you have the podcast. I actually have doctors, chiropractors who are able to make sure that clients come back. So they might do a consult, but then they would lose them. Now, because they send them an email follow-up and say, hey, I heard your problems while you're in. Why don't you listen to this particular episode? I think it'll help you understand what we do here, but it'll also help you understand how it can help your golf game, or how it can, get you back to hockey, whatever it is you want to do. And see the change that chiropractic can make for you. They listen to it and now they sign up, right? And so now they come back for that. And so they have less attrition from that first meeting to getting them to close. So thinking about that may be happening to you and you don't even realize it. So making sure you're looking at all your metrics. And then also remember that we have a lot of partners in the process. And we have a lot of people we need to keep happy. So I do a lot of speaking on stages. And if I didn't have enough promotion opportunities for them, the speaking would start drying up, right? It's because I offer not just that I'm a dynamic speaker and I'm a good speaker and I can go out there and do that, but I offer an opportunity for other speakers to gain value, for the event to gain value, for all of that to go on, because I'm a podcaster and I'm a writer. And if I can't do it because it's not a fit for my show, I always make a recommendation. So they know they're going to get value from me being around and doing that. So you think about that from, am I adding value to my network and my partners? And if I am, that is having residual value for me in terms of invitations, in terms of networking, in terms of referrals back from that network as well. So keep that in mind. And if we focus on that conversion engagement, we're really going to find ourselves with a few things we got to do to make sure that we capitalize on it. We have to share and follow up. These are some of the graphics. So I was writing column in Inc. magazine for 4 years. I quit it in November last year. And I would do these great profiles of these up and coming companies that were startups. PR firms would sometimes pitch me them. And I would write these articles and they would say, I love the article. And then they wouldn't share it. And I was like, what is with that? What's wrong with these people? I just wrote this great article. They should love it. I said something really great about them. They should want to quote that. And what I discovered is that most of the people that you profile are either really busy or really unsure of how to handle technology. And so they want it all packaged pretty for them. So we discovered something, I call this ego bait. We do it for all of our clients. And it's a quote of something I said about my guest or about who I featured in my column. And I share that to them with all the links that they need, embed codes, like everything all prepackaged and ready for them. So they know exactly what to do. So if they've got a team, they just forward that on and the team shares it. And if they don't, then it's really easy for them to do exactly what they need to do. Copy, paste, share. And so they do it. And we send it out the day, whatever, the article comes out or the podcast comes out, and 7 days later, we send a reminder. 9 times out of 10, it's the reminder that works. So if you're not doing that second follow-up, you're leaving shares on the table, because that second follow-up 7 days sounds like a little slap on the wrist. And a lot of times that's when I get the feedback and somebody reaches back out to me who may have been like, you have somebody guest on your show and then they don't respond at all. It happens all the time. They don't say, wow, it was great, I loved it. They didn't say anything to you. And you're like, well, that was really weird. I thought we built a rapport, but they were busy and they just happened to be traveling at the time that you shared it. So 7 days later, when I send that reminder, they'll email back, I'm so sorry, Tracy, I loved the episode. It was so great. Or I love the article. Thank you. I am making my team share this right now, or I'm sharing this right now. And so that reminder is really useful because we get busy. This is like another example. So a different style of ego bait that you can do. But as you see here, this quote, the way you say this is important. So we discovered from doing lots of different styling of this, if I just put, in this particular case, David Corbin was the guest. If David Corbin's picture was the only thing on this and a quote, David is less likely to share it than it is when he's side by side with the host of the show and with the name of the show in the bottom corner. He's more likely to share this one than he is into the other versions. And the reason is because we want shared authority, right? They came on the podcast because they wanted the prestige of that as well. So putting them side by side. If I just post a picture, if David just posted a picture of himself with this kind of quote, it makes him sound kind of conceited, right? He might not do that. He might be like, David Corbin might, but I know you know him, Scott. But some people won't. They would feel like that's too like self-aggrandizing, too self-promotional, and I'm not going to do that. So by doing it this way, though, you create that side-by-side authority. And then the last thing we want to do is promote your stuff. I can't tell you how many people forget to tell people where you are, where your website is, how to find you. Like they don't reach out and say that. They don't ask for ratings and reviews. They don't promo their own things. I mean, we have a whole ad mixing system and promotion system that you can use to promo your own stuff. So if you're afraid of the timeliness of something, so in other words, if Scott was afraid that if I promo the summit in my show and then people listen to it a year later and it's not available anymore, maybe they're going to get annoyed with that. Do it like a drop-in ad. And so we've created a system you can do that with it. So you can drop it in, and then when the event happens, you can take it back out and you can change maybe the URL, maybe send them now to the YouTube page where all the videos are. So you can do those types of things to promoting your own stuff in a non-salesy, pushy way. You can do it as an opportunity. And so often this is something that you forget to do. And when you don't ask for them to give you feedback, you don't ask for them to go somewhere, you don't ask for them to convert, you're not going to get it naturally. You didn't invite them. You didn't create the opportunity for that. And so that's something that you all might want to add, and you'd be surprised at how much just asking like that can create that momentum of where listeners are engaging with you. And now you don't want a pod fade. So the last thing I want to give you before we go to questions is, this is the new binge factor. It's not going to be Netflix. It's formerly Feed Your Brand Center of Influence. But if you go to Meet with Tracy and you go to the binge factor like scheduling section, there's a bunch of sections on Meet with Tracy. But if you go to the binge factor scheduling section, I am interviewing anyone whose podcast 25 episodes or more. You need to still be actively podcasting, and you need to have at least 25 episodes. But I am interested in talking with you, interested in featuring you on my show. I will feature you on my show. I will also write an Authority Magazine article about you, and your binge factor will likely get picked up in BuzzFeed. It takes BuzzFeed like 6 months to pick them up, but they picked up 13 of them already. So so this is a promo opportunity for you to promote your podcast. I'm going to ask you questions about like, how'd you start, advice for others, how do you get great guests and do all of the things. And then I'm going to ask you what you think your binge factor is. And then I'm going to tell you what I think it is. And, I have a broader view than you do of shows. So most people go, I didn't know that was my binge factor. It's like hard for you to analyze that about yourself. So you're going to get a little self-analysis happening in the process. So I invite you to do that. It's meetwithtracy.com, the binge factor. And then of anything that I talked about, if you have any questions or you want that evaluation of your website or anything like that, podetize.com/inquiry. And my team will check it out. Tom will check it out. We'll have somebody get back to you and make sure that we evaluate all of that for you. So we got some questions going on.
Great stuff here. Great stuff there, guys. What questions do you have for Tracy out there right now? I know I've learned some things on there, definitely. The biggest thing is you got to have a good the 4,000 characters on your description when some people really try to do the bare minimum. I'm sure does that drive you bonkers, Tracy, when you see people trying to be minimalists?
Well, I get it from some respect, because you're like, I only want to put in the effort of what people are actually going to read. But we forget out there that there are those bots. They're reading it. They're serving it up. They're doing their curation. So if we're not accommodating that, we're only hurting ourselves in that process.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth asks, so with your new mic, how do you listen?
How do I what?
How do you listen with your new mic?
Oh, so, you would do this in person. You would do this as a live interview. So if I was interviewing Scott live, I'd be doing this, or I can have two microphones. He can be holding one and I can be holding another one. And it records right here and the lights all light up and everything. But what is happening is that if you did want to do it and you wanted to listen, do it through your computer, you can still plug this into the computer and use it exactly like you use your regular mic. There's no difference. So you'd be listening through the computer like this. You'll still have your earbuds in. You can also plug your earbuds into the bottom of the microphone, just like you can do now with almost any mic. So you can use it exactly the same way if you want, but it's not necessary. It's built to be doing live interviews with. But if you only want to buy one mic, then you can use it both ways. So that we designed it to do that as well.
Yeah, good stuff there. Let's see here. Questions here. Okay, so Elizabeth says, please give more details about when and how often to ask people to share. You go back over that.
That's a really great question, Elizabeth. I think that inviting someone at the beginning has been one of the themes that I've heard from some of the successful podcasters that I've been interviewing, but inviting them in a really great way, maybe answering and saying, hey, last week I asked you guys to, give me some feedback on this, and you did. And I'd love to get some more of that. So I'm going to invite you and remind you to go to, feedyourbrand.co and, email me, or I'm going to remind you to go to @feedyourbrand on Facebook. So you're giving them the place you want them to go. Pick one place. And you can change that up. So, for 1 month, maybe you're sending everybody to LinkedIn, and the next month you send them all to Facebook, and the next month you send them to YouTube. So doing that over time and trying to encourage that, especially if it's well matched to the audience. So if you've got a business topic and you're asking them to go to LinkedIn to talk to you, that may make more sense. And so you may start to find out your engagement works in certain areas for certain topics. So mixing it up, but doing right at the beginning, at the early, before you really even launch into, you'd say, hey, I've got a great show for you today. I'm really so looking forward to introducing you to Scott Carson, who's going to be on my show. And you set that up. But before we get to that, I want to touch on something that happened last week, or something we talked about last week. And that's where you insert that invitation. Now, that's in a non-advertising promo way. So if you were going to do an invite to an event or something like that, you would do a throw to the ad. And so what we like to do is we like to just kind of create this break for it. So we'd say, I can't wait to share Scott Carson with you. That sounds like a natural break. Reality is that we create a break right there on the audio. That's how we do it on our end. And what would happen is the ad would insert. Now, the other side of the ad, though, is where I would say, but before we get to that, I want to remind you that we've got the Mass Media Podcast Summit coming up on January 24th to 26th. And so you would put that on in the promo side of it, so that when you remove that, your show would just continue on fluidly.
I love that. Ding, hang on. I like that. That's really good. I love that. That's really good stuff.
Yeah.
And that's always great when you swap out ads and stuff like that, and making sure it's relevant. But that's when you have different events. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also another reason when I was talking about the longer show formats, like having it so that you, in a way, have a natural place for extra ads. That's what worked really well for us for WTFFF, is we would do an interview where there would be a conversation with Tom and I before an intro of that. But before we went to the interview, there was always this transition where we'd say, okay, and let's go to the interview. And then if we dropped an ad in, Tom would say on the ad, but before we do that, let's give a word to our sponsor or whatever it might be, right? And so there was always that kind of like up, but it was still setting that natural transition point. And then after the interview, our listeners were used to us doing a recap where we would give our thoughts and so they wanted that viewpoint. So they would come back. So it gave us another natural place to put an ad in. So now you have your intro, you have a pre-roll ad if you want to run one. I don't like to run pre-roll ads. That's my personal opinion. It just makes a longer intro and people don't like it. But if you needed to, you could have a little promo ad there. And then you would have your introduction of the guest, ad, your guest's interview, ad. I mean, there's 4 spots for ads by the time you're done with it, because you can do a post-roll ad. So, and don't discount post-roll ads. This is my favorite secret weapon. Post-roll ads are the best place for you to get your most, I'm going to say concerted listeners, the listeners who are binge listening to you, the ones who are not going to put the stop button. They're not fast forwarding. They're not jumping to the next episode because they're busy. They're driving in the car. They're the busiest people. That's why they can't even take the time to hit fast forward to get to the next episode, right? They're the ones who need your consulting services. They're the ones who need your done for you packages, right? That's the opportunity in that post-roll position to put that ad there.
The most dedicated listeners get
the most dedicated. Yep, absolutely.
I love that. Well, and there's a lot of things people get upset about. I don't know. No, post something there, or just the asks. Hey, right. Subscribe right there. Swap those in and out for everything. That's a brilliant strategy out there. Elizabeth really liked that one there. Where are you? And you've gone through so many great things here tonight. But is there a place that you did discuss that just drives you bonkers about podcasts, or something that they're doing or not doing that you're like, come on, people? So, because I'm a designer, it's the visual thing. It's that cover art, because it's your first impression. Yeah. And for it to be a Fiverr thing, like, that drives me crazy. If you are not good at directing someone on Fiverr, you are not going to get them thinking about you and your brand and what's the right results. That's a strategic choice. So if you're not going to put the effort in, you can't get the results back. My very first article I ever wrote on Inc. magazine was why $1 million brands don't buy $5 logos. Right? It's like, this is the thing. If you're capable of directing a Fiverr, like, I'd be capable of it. I have a design background, but most people are not. And so if you're not building in, they're not brand strategists. They're not going to bring you that information. This is where you should spend the most effort and get the most help, because this is your first impression. And then living with it when you know it's not working. Like, that just drives me absolutely crazy. Mm-hmm. You know this is bad, so get rid of it. But bad sound is the number one thing that drives listeners away. They will quit a show if the sound is bad, and they will tell you why. Mm-hmm. One of my first reviews was that the show was bad audio, so we quickly fixed our sound on that as well too there for you. So and one just tip for the women out there that it's pretty sexist, but our in the way that I'm going to say this, so I guess it's better I say this than someone like Scott would go out there and say this, but our voices have a different sound wave level, and it tends to annoy people. Like, our women's voices tend to annoy people's ears more than others. So not getting a good sound level to begin with, or not doing this, which is, if I choke up onto my microphone and I get closer, you hear how my voice went deeper. That's a better strategy for you. So understanding how your voice sounds and making sure you're putting that out at the best you can be is a really important strategy, because women get it. It was a study done in TV media, not even anywhere else, but they would complain. The most complaints would be only about women broadcasters. And it was be all about the voice, all about their voice annoys me, the sound, but it's a sound wave, sound level thing. So whatever you can do to make sure that you have a good sound team behind you fixing that, or the way you're recording it, the better off you will be. That's very good tip there. Yeah. Sound is everything in the audio side of things. That's an important thing there. Well, Tracy, I want to say thank you so much.
Welcome.
You've been such great content there. Great stuff there, everybody. Best way for people to reach out to you is Book with Tracy or no?
Yeah, meetwithtracy.com is the way for them to go and book that special interview, and podetize.com/inquiry to talk podcasting with my team and everything. If you want to get your show analyzed, you'll just talk your podcast show and promo it with me. So
there we go. Good stuff there. All right, guys. Well, it's going to wrap it up for this edition. And don't go anywhere because we'll be right back with our final presenter of day one here, JJ Filzanes. So thanks, Tracy.
Yeah,
see you later.
Thank you. Bye.